In the work where everyone doubted her, she was the one who raised the wall, straight, firm, like the dignity she inherited from her uncle. The millionaire laughed at first, but then in silence he saw what he had never seen before. That respect is built with dirty hands and a clean soul. Part 1. The morning air in Austin carried that signature Texas humidity of late spring, when the season embraces the city with its sticky heat and promises of rain. In the elegant suburbs of Westlake Hills, where mansions hide behind high limestone walls, the sound of hammers and drills broke the tranquility of the exclusive neighborhood. Sarah Johnson was just 23, but her hands already knew the roughness of cement and the rebellion of poorly mixed concrete. With her light brown hair pulled back in a high ponytail that let a few stray strands escape in the heat, and green eyes that seemed to capture all the daylight, she stood out among the construction workers like a wildflower in a field of rocks. Her fair skin had tanned slightly after weeks working under the Texas sun, but it retained a softness that made her seem younger than she was. It wasn't common to see a woman on a construction site, especially in such an exclusive area, but Sarah had learned that necessity doesn't care for social conventions. Since her Uncle Ray, the only family member who had truly loved and protected her, had died 6 months ago, she had to fend for herself. And if that meant working from sunup to sundown, hauling bags of cement and clearing debris, she would do it without complaint. The mansion she was working on was a 3-story monster that seemed to grow without restraint. Its owner, Ethan Williams, 32, had inherited not only an immense fortune, but also the most powerful construction firm in the state. At well over 6 feet tall, with an athletic build maintained by hours in private gyms, and blue eyes that contrasted dramatically with his black hair, Ethan was the kind of man society magazines loved to photograph. But that morning, Ethan didn't look like the successful tycoon from the magazine covers. Dressed in an Italian suit that was already showing sweat stains, he strode through the site with a scowl and clenched fists. The project was 4 months behind schedule, and every passing day represented thousands of dollars lost. The workers seemed more interested in extending their breaks than finishing the job, and the perimeter wall that should have been completed last week was still only half built. "This is a disaster," Ethan yelled at the foreman, an older man named Mike who had been in the business for 30 years. "We pay you guys engineer-level wages, and you work like it's a weekend hobby." Mike scratched his head under his yellow hard hat, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Williams, the wall is more complicated than we thought. The ground isn't level, and the guys don't have experience with this type of—" "Don't give me excuses," Ethan interrupted, pointing at the half-finished wall. "My grandmother could have put up that wall faster, and she died 10 years ago." That's when he saw her. Sarah was crouched by a pile of bricks, separating the bad ones from the usable ones. Her movements were precise, economical, as if she had been doing this her whole life. She wore faded jeans, a white t-shirt that clung to her figure in the heat, and work boots that were a size too big. She looked as out of place on that site as an orchid in a desert. Ethan had noticed her since her first day 3 weeks ago. At first he had thought about firing her. What was a woman so young and pretty doing in a place like this? But after seeing the quality of her work, he had decided to let her stay. She was the only one who arrived on time, who didn't complain and who seemed to actually understand what she was doing. "And what does she think?" Ethan asked suddenly, pointing at Sarah. All the workers turned to look at her. Sarah looked up, surprised to be the center of attention. She stood up slowly, wiping her hands on a rag she kept tucked in her belt. "Excuse me, sir?" Her voice was soft but firm, with a slight Texan drawl that made even the simplest words sound musical. "The wall." Ethan walked toward her with decisive steps. "It hasn't progressed in a week. You're here every day. What do you think the problem is?" Sarah glanced at the unfinished wall, then at the workers who were watching her with a mix of curiosity and annoyance. She bit her lower lip, a gesture Ethan found unexpectedly captivating. "Well, the problem isn't the crew's experience," she said finally, choosing her words carefully. "It's that they're using the wrong mix for this type of soil. The clay here is very different from downtown. It needs more lime and less sand." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by the technical precision of her answer. "And how do you know that?" "My uncle was a master builder," Sarah replied, a shadow of sadness crossing her eyes. "He taught me that every piece of land has its own personality. You have to get to know it before you try to build on it." Mike coughed uncomfortably. "With all due respect, Mr. Williams, but we're the ones who know the trade here. The young lady might be very smart, but—" "But what?" Ethan interrupted without taking his eyes off Sarah. "But she's a woman, but she's young, or but she has more common sense than all of you put together?" A tense silence spread across the site. Sarah felt all eyes on her, but she held her head high. It wasn't the first time her ability had been questioned because she was a woman, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Ethan smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had found something interesting. "Tell me, Sarah," he said, recalling her name from some document he had signed weeks ago. "If you were in charge of that wall, how long would it take you to finish it?" "By myself," she asked, surprised. "By yourself?" Sarah looked at the wall again. It was a section about 60 feet long and 7 feet high, with the right mix and working without interruptions. 2 days, she answered with confidence. 2 days, Max. The workers let out mocking laughs. Mike shook his head as if he were watching a child claim she could fly. 2 days? Ethan moved closer to her, so close that Sarah could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the sweat from the heat. How interesting. And what if I told you that if you finish that wall in 2 days, I'll pay you a bonus of $20,000? What would you say to that? I'd say I accept, Sarah replied without hesitation. And what if I told you that if you don't make it, you walk away without getting paid a dime for it? Sarah swallowed hard. She desperately needed that money. Her small apartment in downtown Austin was 2 months behind on rent, and she hadn't eaten much more than ramen noodles and peanut butter for the last week. But there was something in the way Ethan was looking at her, as if she were an amusing experiment, that ignited her pride. I'd accept that too, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. Ethan let out a laugh that sounded more cruel than amused. Perfect, but let's make this more interesting, he addressed the rest of the workers. If this little amateur architect finishes the wall before you guys could have, I'm not just giving her a bonus, I'm firing all of you. The atmosphere turned hostile immediately. The workers glared at her with resentment, as if she had created the challenge instead of simply accepting it. But wait, Ethan continued, clearly enjoying the drama he had created. To make it fair, if she wins, she doesn't just get the money. She can marry me. The words dropped like a bomb into the silence of the construction site. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. I'm sorry? She whispered. You heard me, sweetheart. Ethan stepped so close she could see the tiny gold flecks in his blue eyes. If you prove you can do the job better than these incompetents, you become Mrs. Williams. Imagine, from a construction worker to a millionaire's wife in 2 days, not a bad deal, right? Rage rose in Sarah's throat like hot lava. A maid? Had this man not seen that she knew more about construction than half his team? Did he think her only aspiration was to land a millionaire? I'm not a maid, she said, her voice dangerously calm. I'm a construction worker, and I don't aspire to be the wife of anyone who sees me as a prize in a stupid bet. Ethan blinked, surprised by the force of her response. So you reject the challenge? No. Sarah pulled off her work gloves and threw them on the ground. I accept the challenge, but when I finish that wall in 2 days, I don't want your marriage proposal. I want something far more valuable. What? Respect, she said simply, and triple my monthly pay, in cash. Ethan studied her with a mix of irritation and admiration. This woman was not what he had expected. He had assumed she would be like all the others, dazzled by his money, willing to do anything to escape her humble life. But Sarah was looking at him as if he were the one who needed to prove something, not her. Fine, he extended his hand. You've got a deal. Sarah looked at that perfectly manicured hand, with its watch that probably cost more than everything she had earned in her life. For a moment, she hesitated, not just because of the physical challenge of building that wall alone, but because of something more dangerous. The way her heart sped up when Ethan looked at her like that, as if he were truly seeing her for the first time. But then she remembered her Uncle Ray's words. Kid, in this world there are 2 types of people, those who build and those who destroy. You decide which one you want to be. She shook Ethan's hand firmly. Deal, Mr. Williams. But when I win, I hope you remember this conversation. As their hands touched, they both felt an electric current that had nothing to do with the challenge or the money. It was something more primal, more dangerous. It was the recognition that they had found someone who could change their lives forever. What neither of them knew was that the past was about to catch up with them, and that the name Ray Johnson, Sarah's uncle, appeared in documents Ethan thought had disappeared forever. Have you ever met someone who challenges you in ways you never imagined? Tell us in the comments what you think will happen when Sarah starts building that wall, and don't forget to like this story if you want to know how this battle between pride and desire continues. We also want to know what city you're reading from. Part 2. The next day's dawn arrived, painting the sky orange over the hills, rolling through Austin. Sarah had spent a sleepless night, not so much from the nerves of the challenge, but from mentally reviewing every technique her Uncle Ray had taught her. She got up at 4 in the morning in her small East Austin apartment, took a cold shower, The water heater had been broken for months and made herself a black coffee with the last packet of instant she had left. As she dressed in her sturdiest work clothes, she looked at the only framed photograph she owned. She and her Uncle Ray on her 18th birthday, both covered in cement dust after helping build a school in a rural community. Ray was smiling with that warmth that made everyone like him instantly, his large, calloused hands resting on the shoulders of a teenage Sarah who looked at him with absolute adoration. "If you were here, Uncle Ray, what would you tell me?" she murmured, touching the glass with her fingertips. She could almost hear his raspy voice. "That you show 'em a Johnson doesn't back down, kid, and that you make 'em eat their words." By 5:30, she was already at the construction site an hour before the first worker would arrive. She had stopped at a hardware store at the crack of dawn and bought the materials she would need with her last savings: hydrated lime, special river sand, and a waterproofing additive she had seen the most experienced builders use. If she lost this bet, she wouldn't just be out of a job, she would literally have no money for food. The mansion looked different in the pre-dawn gloom. Without the hustle and bustle of the workers, it seemed like a sleeping beast, imposing and silent. Sarah walked to the section of the wall she had to complete and laid out her tools carefully. Level, plumb line, trowel, string, square. Each one shone from constant use, inherited from her uncle, and maintained with the care one gives to precision instruments. She began by mixing the mortar in proportions she had learned from watching Ray work. It wasn't just theoretical knowledge. Her hands knew how the perfect mix should feel, not too dry to prevent adhesion, not too wet to cause it to sag. As she stirred, she hummed a Willie Nelson song her uncle used to whistle while he worked, feeling that somehow he was there with her. At 6:30, the first group of workers arrived. They stopped in surprise to see her already at work, with 3 perfectly aligned rows of bricks stretching for several feet. Mike, the foreman, approached with a skeptical expression. "Morning, Sarah. I see you're an early bird." "Morning, Mike," she replied without stopping her work. "The sun doesn't wait, and neither do I." "Look, kid," the older man said, lowering his voice. "I've got nothing against you, but what you did yesterday, well, it made us all look bad. The guys are pissed." Sarah paused her work and looked at him directly. "With all due respect, Mike, you all made yourselves look bad on your own. I just told the truth about the mix." "Yeah, but—" Mike looked nervously toward where more workers were arriving. "Mr. Williams can be pretty harsh when things don't go his way. If he really fired everyone over this, then maybe they should work better," Sarah interrupted, but her tone wasn't cruel, just sad. "My uncle always said that misplaced pride destroys more job sites than earthquakes." At 7 o'clock, just like every morning, Ethan Williams arrived, but instead of his usual business suit, he was wearing dark jeans and a white linen shirt that clung slightly to his torso from the morning humidity. Sarah noticed he had rolled up his sleeves, revealing muscular forearms that suggested he hadn't always been just an executive behind a desk. Ethan watched Sarah's progress with an unreadable expression. In the 2 hours she had been working, she had accomplished more than his team had in 2 days. The bricks were perfectly level, the mortar was exactly the right thickness, and she hadn't wasted a single ounce of material. "Impressive," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Sarah didn't respond, but she felt her cheeks flush. She focused on spreading the mortar on the next row, trying to ignore the way Ethan was watching her, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Where did you learn to work like that?" he asked, coming close enough for her to smell his cologne mixed with the aroma of coffee from the cup he was holding. "From my Uncle Ray," Sarah replied, placing a brick with millimeter precision. "He was the best master builder I ever knew." "Was? He died 6 months ago." Sarah's voice softened. "Heart attack." Ethan was silent for a moment. There was something in the way she had said her uncle's name that felt familiar, but he couldn't place why. "I'm sorry," he said finally, and for the first time since he'd met her, his tone lacked the arrogance he seemed to wear like armor. "He taught me that every building tells a story," Sarah continued, not looking at him. "That when you build something, you leave a piece of your soul in every brick. That's why you have to do it right with respect." "Respect for what?" "For the people who will live in what you build, for the workers who will continue your work, for the land you're transforming." Sarah paused to wipe away excess mortar. "My uncle used to say that being a builder is being a little bit God and a little bit slave. You create worlds, but you're always in service of something bigger than yourself." Ethan studied her with renewed interest. This woman was not what he had initially thought. She wasn't an opportunist trying to climb the social ladder. She was a craftswoman, a person who understood the trade from her soul, not just from a technical standpoint. "And what story does this wall tell?" he asked, gesturing to the wall she was raising. Sarah smiled for the first time since she had started working, and Ethan felt something stir in his chest as he watched her face transform. "This wall says that it doesn't matter what others think you can do," she answered. "What matters is what you know you can achieve." As they talked, neither of them noticed that Mike had gotten close enough to overhear the conversation. The name Ray Johnson had sent a chill down his spine. He remembered that man perfectly, honest to a fault, a tireless worker, and the person who had discovered irregularities in the construction company's books 5 years ago. Irregularities that had cost a lot of money to cover up, and that had cost Ray Johnson his career, his reputation, and eventually his life. Mike looked at Sarah with a mixture of respect and terror. If she was Ray's niece, if she had inherited not only his skill but also his sense of justice, she could be very dangerous, especially if she started asking questions about why her uncle had been so suddenly fired from the company now run by Ethan Williams. By 10 in the morning, when the Texas sun was already beating down hard, Sarah had completed almost half the wall. Her pace was steady, unhurried but without pause, like a perfectly calibrated machine. Sweat ran down her forehead and stuck her t-shirt to her body. But she didn't allow herself long breaks, just quick sips of water and 5 minutes in the shade every 2 hours. Ethan had cancelled 2 important meetings to stay and watch her work. He was fascinated by the absolute concentration with which she moved, the economy of her gestures, the way she seemed to read the behavior of each brick before placing it. It was like watching an expert dancer, where every movement had purpose and grace. "Mr. Williams," Mike approached with a worried expression. "Could we speak in private?" Ethan frowned, annoyed by the interruption, but followed the foreman to the temporary office they had set up on the ground floor of the mansion. "What is it?" "It's about the girl, sir, about her uncle." "What about him?" Mike shifted uncomfortably, fidgeting with the hard hat in his hands. "Ray Johnson worked for us 5 years ago. He was a site supervisor on the San Marcos development project." Ethan felt something cold slide down his spine. Ray Johnson. Now he remembered the name, associated with one of the most unpleasant episodes of his business career. The one who made the accusations about the low-quality materials. "The same one," Mike nodded gravely. "The one who found out we were buying substandard concrete and billing for premium grade." Ethan's jaw tensed. That scandal had nearly ruined the company. They had only managed to cover it up by bribing inspectors, firing Ray without references, and launching a smear campaign that ensured no serious construction company would ever hire him again. "Do you think she knows anything?" "I don't know, sir, but if she's as smart as she seems, and if her uncle told her anything before he died..." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the complications multiply. He had made the bet on impulse, intrigued by a beautiful woman who seemed more capable than his employees. He hadn't considered that she might be connected to the ghost that had haunted him most in recent years. "What do you suggest we do?" "We could find a way for her to not finish the wall." Mike lowered his voice. "A small accident, a problem with the materials, anything to make her stop." "No," Ethan replied faster than he had planned. "Absolutely not." "But, sir..." "I said no, Mike. She's going to finish that wall on her own merit or she's going to fail on her own. We are not going to sabotage her." Mike looked at him surprised. It was the first time in 5 years he had seen Ethan Williams reject a pragmatic solution to a potential problem. "As you wish, sir. But what if she really does know something about what happened to her uncle?" Ethan walked to the window, from where he could see Sarah working under the sun. Her small but determined figure contrasted with the immensity of the construction site around her, but she didn't seem intimidated. On the contrary, she moved with the confidence of someone who had found her place in the world. "Then we'll deal with that when the time comes," he murmured. "But for now, let her work." What Ethan didn't say out loud was that, for the first time in years, he had found someone who challenged him intellectually, who didn't flatter him or try to impress him with feigned vulnerability. Sarah Johnson was real in a way he had forgotten existed, and that terrified him as much as it attracted him. When he returned to the construction area, Sarah was placing the last brick of the morning section. She had taken off her gloves and was working with her bare hands, feeling the texture of the mortar directly. Ethan noticed she had small cuts on her knuckles and a sunburn on the back of her neck that her ponytail didn't quite cover. "Don't you have any sunscreen?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Sarah looked at him over her shoulder with an ironic smile. "Seriously, Mr. Williams? Do you think my budget includes luxury cosmetics?" Ethan felt a pang of something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Shame. He was so accustomed to his world of privilege that he had forgotten what it meant to have to choose between sunscreen and food. "Wait here," he said, and walked quickly to his truck. He returned 5 minutes later with a bottle of high-protection sunscreen and a Texas Longhorns baseball cap. "So you don't get dehydrated," he said, also offering her a cold bottle of water. Sarah accepted them with a surprised expression. For a moment, their fingers brushed as she took the bottle, and they both felt that same electric current from the day before. "Thanks," she murmured, "but this isn't going to make me work any less hard." "I don't expect it to," Ethan replied. "I just don't want you to get hurt." There was something in his voice, a softness Sarah hadn't heard before, that made her truly look at him for the first time. Without the usual arrogance, without the mocking smile, Ethan Williams was just a man concerned about another person's well-being, and that was more dangerous to Sarah's defenses than all his wealth and power combined. "Okay," she said finally. "But when I finish this wall, we're still just boss and employee, right?" Ethan smiled, but this time it was a genuine smile, not the mask of arrogance he usually wore. "If that's what you want," he answered. "But something tells me things have already changed, Sarah Johnson, and there's no going back." As she put on the cap and applied the sunscreen, Ethan wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life, or if he had finally found the one person who could save him from himself. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, Sarah was thinking the exact same thing. The challenge is only half over, but you can already feel something deeper brewing between these two. What do you think will happen when Sarah discovers the truth about what happened to her uncle? Can Ethan redeem himself from the mistakes of the past? Part 3. The second day dawned with a light drizzle that made everyone on the site look anxiously at the sky. In Austin, spring showers can be treacherous. Either they pass quickly like a sigh or they linger all day, turning the work area into an impossible mud pit. Sarah arrived at 5 in the morning, just like the day before, but this time she found Ethan already waiting for her with a steaming coffee and an industrial-sized umbrella. "Good morning," he said, offering her the cup. "I thought you might need this." "Good morning, Mr. Williams," she replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. "But I hope you're not here to tell me that the rain means I automatically lose." "Quite the opposite." Ethan opened the umbrella over the section of the wall that remained to be finished. "I want to see if you're as good as you say, even in adverse conditions." Sarah took a sip of the coffee and closed her eyes for a moment, savoring not just the hot liquid, but the luxury of having something better than the cheap instant coffee she was used to. When she opened them, she found Ethan watching her with a strangely tender expression. "What?" she asked, feeling self-conscious. "Nothing." Ethan looked away. "It's just, you look different when you let your guard down." "I can't afford to let my guard down," Sarah replied, setting down the cup and starting to prepare her tools. "Especially not with you." "Why especially with me?" Sarah paused what she was doing and looked at him directly. "Because men like you are used to getting what they want. And I'm not for sale, Mr. Williams. Not my work, not my dignity, not myself." Ethan felt as if he'd been slapped. Women approached him for his money, others for his social status, some simply for the thrill of conquering someone powerful. But Sarah saw him as a threat, not a prize. "And what if I told you that not everything is as it seems?" he asked in a low voice. "I'd say that's exactly what someone who wants things to seem different than they are would say." Sarah began to mix the mortar, her movements sharper than usual. "Look, Mr. Williams, I appreciate the coffee and the umbrella, but I don't need you to rescue me. I need you to respect me." The rain picked up a little, creating a steady sound on the tarp Ethan had spread. Instead of leaving as Sarah expected him to, he stood there, holding the umbrella in silence while she worked. For the next 2 hours, a strange dance unfolded between them. Ethan adjusted the umbrella according to Sarah's movements, handed her tools without her asking, and occasionally held the other end of the leveling string. They didn't speak, but there was a synchronization in their actions that suggested a deeper understanding than either was willing to admit. At 8 o'clock, when the first workers arrived, they were surprised to see their boss soaked but firmly holding the umbrella over Sarah, who had managed to keep her work area dry and was continuing to build despite the rain. "Mr. Williams," Mike approached with a concerned expression, "don't you think you should go inside? You're going to get sick." "I'm fine." Ethan didn't take his eyes off Sarah. "How is the team's work going with this rain?" Mike glanced over to where his men were taking shelter under a makeshift covering, playing cards and waiting for the rain to stop. "Well, it's dangerous to work in these conditions. We thought we'd wait for it to let up." "But she's not waiting," Ethan observed. "Why are you?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. The workers exchanged uncomfortable looks, knowing they had been outmatched, not only in skill, but in dedication. At 10 in the morning, the rain finally stopped, and a radiant sun emerged, causing all the accumulated water to evaporate into an ethereal mist. Sarah straightened up, took off her cap, and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of cement on her skin. Ethan, who had held the umbrella for 3 hours, had numb arms and a soaked shirt, but he hadn't complained once. "You can go now," Sarah said, looking at the progress she had made. "The umbrella isn't necessary anymore. And what if I prefer to stay? Why would you do that?" Ethan set the umbrella aside and sat on a pile of bricks, stretching his sore arms. "Because in my life no one ever really taught me how to work," he admitted. "My father gave me the company, but he never taught me how to build. You understand something I've been pretending to understand for years." Sarah studied him with new attention. There was something vulnerable in the way he had said it, something that contrasted dramatically with the image of the self-assured tycoon he usually projected. "You never worked on a construction site?" "Never." Ethan smiled ironically. "My father thought that was for the common people. I was supposed to learn finance, management, public relations, the important things," he said. "And what do you think? I think my father was wrong about a lot of things." Ethan looked at the wall Sarah had been building. "I think you can't run something you don't understand from the inside out." Sarah felt something soften in her chest. She had expected arrogance, condescension, maybe even inappropriate propositions. She had not expected honesty. "Do you want to learn?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Would you really teach me? Just the basics?" Sarah blushed slightly. "And only because, well, because my uncle used to say that knowledge shouldn't die with you." For the next hour, Sarah taught Ethan how to properly hold a trowel, how to spread mortar evenly, how to read a bubble level. Ethan was a clumsy but enthusiastic student, and Sarah discovered she had infinite patience for explaining things that were second nature to her. "No, not like that," she told him for the 10th time, moving closer to adjust the angle of his wrist. "The mortar should flow, not be pushed. Feel it, don't force it." As their hands touched to correct his technique, they both felt that electric current that was becoming both familiar and frightening. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. "Like this?" Ethan murmured, very aware of how close she was. "Yes," Sarah whispered, also very aware that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "That's right." They stayed like that for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Their hands joined on the trowel handle, their faces inches apart. Sarah could see the small wrinkles around Ethan's eyes that spoke of genuine smiles, not just the diplomatic ones he used in public. Ethan could see the golden freckles the sun had awakened on Sarah's nose and wondered what it would be like to kiss each one. The moment was broken when Mike coughed loudly behind them. "Mr. Williams, excuse me, but you have an urgent call in the office." Ethan and Sarah pulled apart abruptly, both blushing and flustered by the intensity of what had just happened. I have to take this," Ethan mumbled. "But thanks for the lesson." "It was nothing," Sarah replied, concentrating intensely on cleaning the excess mortar from the trowel. As Ethan walked away, Sarah tried to calm her racing heart. She couldn't afford to feel something for him. He was her boss, he was rich, he was part of a world she would never belong to. But more than that, she had a feeling there were secrets between them, unsaid things that could destroy any chance of what? Of really getting to know each other. In the office, Ethan took the call distractedly, his mind still on the moment he had shared with Sarah. It wasn't until his assistant mentioned the name Ray Johnson that he paid full attention. "What did you say?" "The documents you requested on the Johnson case from 5 years ago have arrived. You needed them for the end-of-year audit." Ethan felt his blood run cold. He had requested those documents weeks ago before he met Sarah, as part of a routine review of old cases. Now the coincidence felt like a bad omen. "Leave them on my desk," he said, "and make sure no one else sees them." For the rest of the day, Ethan couldn't focus on anything but those documents waiting for him in his office. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to work with a fierce determination, as if by concentrating completely on the construction, she could forget the confusing feelings Ethan had stirred in her. At 5 in the afternoon, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Sarah placed the last brick. She stood up slowly, her back aching, but with a smile of absolute satisfaction. The wall was finished, and it was perfect. Every line straight, every angle precise, every surface as smooth as if it had been polished. The workers had gradually gathered to observe the final result. Even those who had resented her couldn't deny the quality of the work. It was simply the most perfect wall they had ever seen built. Ethan came out of the office with the documents in his hand, feeling as though he were walking to his own execution. But when he saw Sarah standing next to her masterpiece, her hair shining in the golden afternoon light, and an expression of pride and exhaustion mixed on her face, he momentarily forgot everything else. "You finished it," he said, approaching her. "Yes," Sarah replied, wiping her hands on a rag. 2 days, just like I promised." Ethan scanned the wall, genuinely impressed. It wasn't just that it was finished, it was that it was perfect in a way that transcended mere technique. There was something in that construction that spoke of a love for the craft, of respect for a job well done. "It's extraordinary," he admitted. "I've never seen anything like it. My uncle taught me that when you build something it should last forever." Sarah gently touched one of the bricks. "Because someone is going to live with what you do long after you're gone." The mention of her uncle made Ethan remember the documents in his hand. Their weight seemed to have multiplied by 10. "Sarah," he began, but she interrupted him. "The deal was triple my monthly pay if I finished the wall in 2 days," she said, squaring her shoulders. "I finished it in a day and a half." "You're right." Ethan pulled out his checkbook. "How would you like to be paid?" "Cash, please. Banks and I aren't great friends." As Ethan wrote the check, he wrestled internally over whether to tell her about the documents he had discovered. Her uncle's story was worse than he had remembered. Ray Johnson hadn't just been fired, he had been systematically destroyed professionally for daring to report corrupt practices. And although Ethan hadn't been directly involved, he had just graduated from college when it happened, he bore the name of the responsible company. "Sarah," he said finally, holding out the check, "I need to tell you something about your uncle." She took the check but didn't look at it, focusing instead on Ethan's serious expression. "What about him?" "He worked for my company 5 years ago and it didn't end well." "What do you mean it didn't end well?" Ethan took a deep breath. He could lie, downplay the story, invent some version that absolved him. But when he looked into those green eyes that had challenged, inspired, and confused him for the past 2 days, he knew he couldn't. He was fired for making accusations of corruption within the company. Accusations that, according to these documents, he held up the folder, were completely true. The color drained from Sarah's face as if someone had turned off a tap. "What kind of accusations?" "We were using substandard materials, but charging premium prices. Buying adulterated concrete, dirty sand, second-rate steel. Your uncle discovered it and reported it." Sarah sat down slowly on a pile of bricks, as if her legs could no longer support her. "And what happened after that?" "He was fired without references. Worse than that, they made sure no respectable construction company would hire him again. They put him on an informal blacklist." "That's why he couldn't get a job," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to him. "That's why the last years of his life were so hard. That's why." "Why what?" Sarah looked up, and Ethan saw her eyes were filled with tears she refused to shed. "That's why he died poor and alone, believing he had failed at everything that mattered." The silence that followed was so heavy, it seemed to have its own gravity. Ethan wanted to go to her, to comfort her somehow, but he knew he represented everything that had destroyed her uncle's life. "Sarah, I wasn't directly involved in that decision. I had just joined the company, and my father—" "Your father?" Sarah stood up slowly, and when she spoke, her voice had a coldness that cut like broken glass. "Of course, it's always someone else's fault, isn't it? That's not it. It's just— You know what, Mr. Williams?" Sarah tore the check in half and let the pieces fall at his feet. "Keep your money. I don't want anything that comes from the company that destroyed my uncle." "Sarah, wait!" But she was already walking toward the exit, gathering her tools with mechanical movements. Ethan followed her, desperate to explain, to make her understand that he was not the enemy. "Please, let me explain!" Sarah stopped at the site entrance and turned to face him. The tears she had been holding back finally streamed down her cheeks, leaving clean trails in the dirt and cement on her face. "To explain what? That while my uncle was dying of shame and poverty, you were living in mansions paid for with stolen money? That while he couldn't get a job building a doghouse, you inherited an empire built on lies?" "It wasn't like that." "Then how was it?" The pain in her voice was so raw that Ethan felt as if something was being torn from his chest. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you hired me, challenged me, seduced me with coffee and umbrellas, knowing perfectly well who I was and what your family did to mine. I didn't know who you were until yesterday. And does that matter?" Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving more cement streaks. "Does it matter that you didn't know my name when your company destroyed an honest man's life?" Ethan felt all the words get stuck in his throat. She was right. It didn't matter that he hadn't been directly involved, that he had been too young, that he hadn't known the details. He carried the company's name, he had inherited its profits, and he had never questioned where they came from. "You're right," he said finally. "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorrier than you can possibly imagine. Your apology won't bring my uncle back to life." Sarah picked up her tools and walked toward the street. "Nor will it erase the years he spent believing he had failed." "Sarah, please." She stopped one last time but didn't turn around. "You know what the worst part is, Mr. Williams? For a moment, during these 2 days, I thought you might be different. I thought I had found someone who really saw me, who understood what it means to work with honor, but it turns out you're just another rich man playing with the lives of the poor. And with those words, Sarah Johnson walked off the construction site and out of Ethan Williams' life, leaving him standing amidst the rubble of what could have been the most real love of his life. As he watched her walk away, her back straight and her head held high despite the pain, Ethan knew he had lost something infinitely more valuable than money or property. He had lost the chance to be the man she deserved, the man he might have become if he had met her sooner, if circumstances had been different. But the circumstances were what they were, and now he would have to live with the consequences of his family's sins, and with the knowledge that he had held in his hands the only woman who had managed to see beyond his money and his power, only to lose her to the lies upon which that fortune was built. The workers watched the scene in silence, understanding they had witnessed more than a simple workplace dispute. They had seen something beautiful break before it had a chance to fully bloom, and at the center of it all, the perfect wall that Sarah had built stood as a silent monument to wasted talent, frustrated love, and the justice that sometimes arrives too late to heal the wounds left by injustice. Can true love survive when the past threatens to destroy everything? Will Ethan be able to redeem himself, or will Sarah never be able to forgive his family's sins? Tell us in the comments what you think Ethan should do now. Like this story if it's touching your heart, and share with us what city you're reading from. The story is just beginning, and broken hearts are sometimes mended in ways we never imagined. Says he well fast he Connor Part 4. The days following Sarah's departure stretched before Ethan like an endless desert. The Westlake Hills mansion, once just another construction project, had now become a constant reminder of everything he had lost. Every morning upon arriving at the site, his gaze was automatically drawn to the perfect wall she had built, and each time it felt like an invisible fist was squeezing his chest. The workers had returned to their usual pace after Sarah left, but there was something different in the atmosphere. They had seen her work, witnessed her dedication and skill, and now their own efforts seemed mediocre in comparison. Mike, the foreman, avoided Ethan's gaze, aware that his role in the past cover-up had come to light. Ethan had spent the last 3 nights awake in his study, surrounded by documents detailing every aspect of the Ray Johnson case. The investigation had revealed something even worse than he had imagined. His father had not only covered up the use of faulty materials, but had actively ordered the destruction of Ray's reputation. There were letters, internal memos, and records of payments to corrupt inspectors, all bearing the signature of Ethan Williams Sr. But what tormented him most was a detail he had initially overlooked. Ray Johnson had been diagnosed with heart problems 2 years after being fired. His doctor had noted in the file that chronic stress and depression had significantly contributed to his deteriorating health. In medical terms, Ethan's company had indirectly participated in the death of a good man. On the 4th day after Sarah's departure, Ethan made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. First, he called an extraordinary meeting with all the board members of Williams Construction. The older men who had worked with his father arrived at the boardroom with confident expressions, expecting to discuss new projects and quarterly profits. They did not expect to find copies of incriminating documents at each seat. "Good morning, gentlemen." Ethan entered the room with a black briefcase, dressed in a dark suit that gave him a more serious air than usual. "Before we begin, I want you to review the documents in front of you." Robert Sullivan, the oldest vice president and his father's right-hand man, turned pale as he recognized the papers. "Ethan, this is ancient history. I don't see why." "Ancient history." Ethan sat at the head of the table, not with his usual relaxation, but with the posture of a man who had made a difficult decision. "Robert, a man died believing he was a failure, when in reality he was a victim of our corruption. Does that seem like ancient history to you?" Uncomfortable murmurs filled the room. Edward Vance, the chief accountant, cleared his throat. "Son, I understand you might be upset about past methods, but we have to be practical. Those practices were common in the industry. If we start turning over old stone, we're going to turn them all over," Ethan interrupted, "and we're going to clean up every stain they left." "Are you crazy?" Robert stood up, losing his diplomatic composure. "Do you have any idea what it would cost to officially acknowledge those mistakes? The lawsuits that could arise? The damage to our reputation?" "Our reputation is already damaged." Ethan opened the briefcase and took out a thick envelope. "We were just the only ones who didn't know it." The envelope contained private investigations Ethan had commissioned over the last few days. Details on every project where defective materials had been used, every family that had suffered structural problems in their homes, every worker who had been fired for reporting irregularities. "Here's what we're going to do." Ethan distributed copies of the report. First, we're going to contact every family affected by our defective projects. We will pay for full repairs, plus compensation for damages. Second, we will establish a compensation fund for workers who were unjustly fired. And third, we will implement a system of total transparency in all our future projects. That will ruin us, shouted Edward. Do you have any idea how much money we're talking about? I have an exact idea. Ethan smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. Approximately 60% of our liquid assets, but I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and corrupt. Robert leaned forward, his expression calculating. Ethan, I know you feel guilty about what happened with your father, but he's gone now. You can't carry his sins forever. I'm not carrying his sins. Ethan stood up. I'm cleaning up the mess he left, and if any of you aren't willing to be part of the solution, you can resign right now. The ensuing silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, Robert Sullivan stood up, gathering the documents. We always knew you were different from your father, Ethan, but we never thought you were this naive. If you want to destroy everything he built, go ahead, but don't count on me to be part of this financial suicide. One by one, the oldest board members followed Robert out of the room, until only Ethan and two young executives hired in recent years remained. Carmen Rodriguez, the new director of projects, and Alex Torres, the head of engineering. Are you sure you want to stay? Ethan asked. What's coming is going to be very difficult. Carmen, a 35-year-old woman with a master's in architecture and a reputation for being uncompromising on quality, nodded without hesitation. I've spent 2 years trying to convince the old board to implement better quality controls. If you're willing to do it, I'm with you. Alex, a 30-year-old civil engineer who had joined the company with innovative ideas about sustainable construction, also nodded. My dad was a mason, sir. I know what it means to build with honor. If we're going to change things, count me in. That same afternoon, Ethan did something he had never done before. He took off his suit, put on work clothes, and personally went to each of the company's active construction sites. Not to supervise from the comfort of a temporary office, but to speak directly with the workers. At the first site, a low-income housing development in San Marcos, he found exactly what he expected: second-rate materials, unmotivated workers, and supervisors who acted more like prison guards than team leaders. Good afternoon, Ethan addressed a group of masons resting in the shade of a maple tree. I'm Ethan Williams, owner of this company. The men exchanged nervous glances. It wasn't common for the boss to show up on site, let alone dressed like them in jeans and a work shirt. Any problem, sir? Asked an older man with calloused hands and a cautious expression. Yes, there are problems. Ethan sat on the ground with them, ignoring the surprised looks. But they're not what you might think. The problem is that for years, this company has not respected your work or your dignity, and that's going to change. Over the next hour, Ethan listened to complaints that had been ignored for years: inadequate tools, materials arriving in poor condition, impossible schedules, abusive supervisors, and constantly delayed wages. Why haven't you reported these situations? Ethan asked. A young worker, barely 20, with eyes that seemed older than they should, replied, To who, sir? The last guy who complained about bad materials was Ray, about 5 years ago. They fired him and he never got a decent job again. We have families to feed. The name Ray hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Even in death, his memory was still a lesson to the workers. Don't complain, or you'll pay the consequences. Ray Johnson was right, Ethan said, surprising everyone. The materials were bad and he had the right to complain. What happened to him was an injustice, and I'm going to make sure it never happens again. The workers looked at him with a mix of skepticism and cautious hope. Sir, said the older man, with all due respect, we've heard promises before. This time will be different. Ethan stood up. And you'll see it starting tomorrow. New tools, better materials, supervisors who respect your work, and wages paid on time. But I need you to change something too. What's that? I want you to tell me the truth, always. If something is wrong, if someone disrespects you, if the materials are no good, I want you to report it directly to me, and I guarantee there will be no retaliation. A skeptical silence followed his words. And how do we know you can keep that promise? Asked the young worker. Ethan took out his phone and dialed a number. Carmen, it's Ethan. I want you to send new tools to the San Marcos site tomorrow and change all the cement to the best quality we have. Yes, I know it costs more. No, it's not negotiable. Okay, thanks. He hung up and looked at the workers. That's my answer, actions, not words. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became a constant presence on the construction sites, not as the distant boss who supervised from afar, but as someone who genuinely wanted to understand every aspect of the building process. He learned to mix concrete properly, to read structural plans from a worker's perspective, and to identify poor quality materials just by touch. But at night, when he returned to his empty mansion, the image of Sarah haunted him. She had become a healthy obsession. Every improvement he implemented in the company, every worker he treated with more respect, every higher quality material he ordered, he did it thinking of her, of what she would say if she saw him, of whether she would be proud of the changes he was making. Carmen Rodriguez had noticed her boss's transformation. "Can I ask you a personal question, sir?" she said one afternoon while they were reviewing the costs of the new improvement program. "Of course. Does this have to do with a woman?" Ethan looked up from the documents, surprised by the directness of the question. "Why do you ask?" "Because in my 15 years in construction, I've seen many powerful men make drastic changes, but I've never seen someone willing to lose money to gain respect. That usually has to do with wanting to be worthy of someone special." Ethan smiled sadly. "There was a woman, an extraordinary worker, who made me see how much damage we had caused, but I lost her before I could show her I could be different, and you can't find her and show her now. It's not that simple. Her uncle was one of our victims, Ray Johnson." Carmen was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Sir, may I suggest something?" "Go ahead." "Instead of trying to show her that you've changed, why don't you prove that her uncle was right? Make his memory mean something." The idea lingered in Ethan's mind for days. How could he honor Ray Johnson's memory in a way that truly mattered? The answer came when he was reviewing Ray's personnel files he'd gotten from HR. Among the routine employment documents, he found something that took his breath away. A construction project Ray had designed in his spare time. A detailed plan for a community center in one of Austin's poorest neighborhoods, complete with technical specifications, structural calculations, and even a budget estimate. In the margins of the document, handwritten in the careful script of an educated man, were personal notes. "So the kids have a safe place to study, multi-purpose room for family events, community kitchen for food programs." Ray Johnson hadn't just been an honest worker. He had been a visionary who wanted to use his skills to improve his community, and he had died without being able to realize that dream. Ethan found the address of the neighborhood mentioned in the project, Dove Springs, a marginalized area where shacks of tin and cardboard were crammed together on unpaved streets. He went there on a Saturday morning, driving his truck down paths that barely deserved to be called streets. What he found made him understand why Ray had wanted to build there. Children playing in vacant lots full of trash, families washing clothes in dirty water barrels, teenagers with nothing to do but sit on corners watching time pass. It was real poverty, the poverty he had seen from the window of his air-conditioned office, but had never experienced directly. He stopped by a small store where several women were buying tortillas and vegetables. One of them, a woman in her 60s with a floral apron and a kind expression, approached curiously upon seeing the new truck. "Good morning, young man. Are you lost?" "Good morning, ma'am. I'm looking for information about this community. Have you lived here long?" "All my life, son. I'm Rose Martinez, but everyone calls me Mama Rose. How can I help you?" Ethan took Ray's project from the passenger seat. "Did you know a man named Ray Johnson?" Mama Rose's eyes lit up immediately. "Mr. Ray, of course I knew him. That man was a saint, always measuring lots, making drawings, telling us that one day we would have a beautiful community center right here in the heart of the neighborhood. Did he live here?" "No. He lived downtown, but his sister Luz had a little house here, where that vacant lot is now." She pointed to a weed-covered piece of land. "Mr. Ray came every Sunday to visit her, and he always stayed to chat with us about his plans for the community." "What happened to his plans?" Mama Rose's expression saddened. "Well, they just stayed dreams, son. Mr. Ray lost his job several years ago, and then he got sick. The last few months of his life, he hardly came around. He said he felt terrible for not being able to keep his promise to us." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "And the lot where his sister's house was?" "It's been abandoned since Ms. Luz died, about 3 years ago. The owners don't live here, and well, nobody has the money to buy it and do something useful with it. Would you like to see Mr. Ray's dream come true?" Mama Rose looked at him with a mix of hope and disbelief. "Can you do that, young man?" "I can try, but I'll need the help of the whole community." That afternoon, Ethan returned to his office with a clear mission. He contacted a real estate lawyer and tasked him with investigating the legal status of the lot in Dove Springs. At the same time, he called Carmen and Alex for an urgent meeting. "I want you to review this project." He handed them copies of Ray's design. "And tell me how much it would cost to build it with the best materials available." Carmen studied the plans with a look of growing admiration. "Who did this?" "The calculations are perfect. The design is functional and beautiful, and it's specifically designed for the needs of a low-income community. Ray Johnson, the man my father destroyed." Alex looked up from the documents. Sir, this isn't just a construction project, it's a life project. Look at these details. Natural ventilation to reduce energy costs, rainwater harvesting, spaces that can be adapted for different uses depending on the community's needs. This man truly understood what it means to build for people, not for profit. How much would it cost? Carmen did some quick calculations. With premium materials, skilled labor, and all necessary permits, approximately $300,000. Ethan didn't hesitate for a second. Do it, and I want it to be perfect. Exactly as Ray designed it, but with the best materials we can get. Sir? Alex looked confused. Is this going to be a for-profit project? No, it's going to be a gift. From Ray Johnson to his community, and from us to the memory of a good man. Over the following weeks, Ethan immersed himself in organizing the project with an energy he had never felt before. He bought the vacant lot from Ms. Luz's heirs, managed all the construction permits, and hired the best specialists available. But more importantly, he involved the community in every step of the process. He organized neighborhood meetings where residents could give their input on design details, established a system where local youth could work as helpers on the construction to gain experience and money, and ensured that every major decision was made in consensus with the community. Mama Rose became his unofficial liaison with the neighbors, and it was she who suggested something that had never occurred to Ethan. Mr. Ethan, don't you think it would be nice to invite Mr. Ray's niece to see her uncle's dream coming to life? Ethan's heart raced. You know his niece? Of course. Sarah used to come with Mr. Ray when she was younger, a very sweet little girl with beautiful green eyes. Mr. Ray loved her like a daughter. Do you know where she lives now? Not exactly, but I can ask around. In this neighborhood we all know each other, and someone is bound to know. That night Ethan lay awake, imagining the moment he might see Sarah again. But this time would be different. This time he would have something real to show her, that her uncle's memory was being honored, that his work and dreams had not been in vain. However, fate had other plans. 2 days later, Carmen came into his office with a worried expression. Sir, we have a problem with the community center project. What kind of problem? A group of investors has approached the community offering to buy up all the land in the area to build a shopping mall. They're offering a lot of money, more than most of these families have ever seen in their lives. Ethan felt his blood run cold. And what did they say? They're divided. Some want to sell because they really need the money. Others want us to continue with the community center. There's a neighborhood meeting tomorrow night to decide what to do. Who were the investors? Carmen consulted her notes. A company called Pacific Urban Development. The representative is a Mr. Robert Sullivan. The name hit Ethan like a slap in the face. Robert Sullivan, his former vice president, the man who had left in a rage when Ethan decided to clean up the company. Now he was trying to sabotage the project that mattered most to Ethan, and in the process, destroy a community that finally had hope. The war was on. But this time, Ethan wouldn't just fight with money and power. This time, he would fight with something Robert had never understood, the respect and loyalty earned through actions, not threats. And maybe, if he was lucky, the woman who had taught him the difference between building and destroying would be there to see him try to build something that truly mattered. Can Ethan prove he's really changed, or will the ghosts of the past destroy his chance at redemption? Will Sarah show up at the most crucial moment? Give this a like if this story has you on the edge of your seat, and tell us in the comments what you would do in Ethan's place. We also want to know what corner of the world you're reading from. Part 5. The neighborhood meeting was scheduled for 8 o'clock at night in the only space large enough in the Dove Springs community. The makeshift basketball court the local youth had built with planks and hoops without nets. By 7:30, the place was already packed with entire families carrying plastic chairs, thermoses of coffee, and the tense expressions of people about to make a life-altering decision. Ethan arrived 15 minutes early, accompanied by Carmen and Alex. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, but clean jeans and a white cotton shirt, trying to show respect without appearing condescending. But his heart was beating so hard, he was sure it could be heard over the crowd's murmur. Robert Sullivan was already there, looking impeccable in a dark grey suit that probably cost more than an average family in the neighborhood earned in 6 months. He was accompanied by 2 younger men with leather briefcases and the predatory demeanor of those who see business opportunities in others' desperation. Ethan, Robert approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What a surprise to see you here. I thought you'd be too busy playing social benefactor. Robert, Ethan maintained a neutral tone. I didn't expect to see you involved in residential developments. I thought your specialty was commercial construction. Opportunities are everywhere, my dear boy. You just have to know how to spot them. Robert glanced around the makeshift court with barely disguised disdain. These people need real money, not castles in the sky. Before Ethan could respond, Mama Rose approached them with her usual warm smile, but she wore a worried expression he hadn't seen on her before. "Good evening, Mr. Ethan. Have you met Mr. Sullivan?" "We've known each other for years," Ethan replied. "How is the community feeling about the two proposals?" Mama Rose sighed deeply. "Divided, son. Very divided. There are families who really need that money. Ms. Peterson has a sick child who needs surgery, and Mr. Carter is 3 months behind on rent. For them, Mr. Sullivan's offer is like a miracle. And the others? The others remember Mr. Ray's dream. They know the community center would be something permanent, something that would benefit our children and grandchildren. But the money is now, you understand?" Ethan understood perfectly. It was easy to talk about a long-term vision when you had a full stomach and paid bills. For families living day to day, the difference between one proposal and another could be the difference between survival and disaster. At 8 o'clock sharp, Mr. Henderson, the community's natural leader, due to his 70 years of wisdom and his reputation as a fair man, called for silence by tapping a stick against a piece of sheet metal. Neighbors, families, friends, his raspy but firm voice reached every corner of the court. "We all know why we're here. We have 2 offers on the table, and we have to decide what's best for our community." The ensuing silence was so thick you could feel the collective tension. Mr. Henderson gestured toward Robert. "First, Mr. Sullivan from Pacific Urban Development will speak." Robert stood up with the confidence of someone who had given these presentations hundreds of times. He pulled out a portable projector and began showing glossy images of modern shopping malls, financial compensation figures, and relocation plans. "Friends, neighbors," he began in a syrupy voice, "what we're offering you is a unique opportunity to change your lives forever. Each property-owning family would receive $75,000 in cash for their property, plus a guarantee of employment at the new mall we will build here." Murmurs of astonishment swept through the crowd. For most of these families, $75,000 was more money than they had ever had. "Furthermore," Robert continued, "the mall would bring development, permanent jobs and services that you and your children deserve. Imagine supermarkets, pharmacies, ATMs, restaurants, all right here in your neighborhood." The images on the projector showed smiling families shopping in modern stores, children playing in pristine commercial areas, uniformed employees serving with professional courtesy. "And where would we live?" a young woman with a baby in her arms asked. "Excellent question," Robert smiled. "We've identified a housing development just 15 miles from here, with new houses, guaranteed running water, and public transportation directly to downtown Austin. With the money you receive, you can buy a house there and have money left over to start a new life." More murmurs, these more enthusiastic. The idea of new houses with running water and public transport sounded like a dream to families who had struggled with poor services for years. "When would you need an answer?" Mr. Henderson asked. "Preferably tonight." Robert put away the projector. "These kinds of opportunities don't wait, and we have other projects awaiting our attention. If the community accepts, we could start payments next week." The murmur intensified. Ethan could see that several neighbors were already convinced. Robert's proposal was tempting because it was immediate, concrete, and offered a solution to urgent problems. "Now let's hear from young Ethan Williams," Mr. Henderson announced. Ethan stood up, but instead of walking to the front of the crowd, he moved to the center of the circle formed by the chairs, placing himself on the same level as everyone else. "Neighbors, friends," he began, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Before I tell you about my proposal, I want to tell you a story." He took out the photograph of Ray from his backpack that he had found in the company archives, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, smiling next to a newly finished construction. "This is Ray Johnson. He worked for my company for 15 years until 5 years ago, when he discovered we were using low-quality materials in our projects. When he reported it, they fired him and made sure he never got another job in construction." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Mama Rose brought her hands to her heart, recognizing the photograph. "Ray died 6 months ago, poor and believing he had failed in life. But before he died, he designed something special for this community." Ethan unfolded the original plans for the community center, a place where your children could study safely, where families could gather to celebrate, where young people could learn trades that would give them a dignified future. He passed the plans from hand to hand, and he could see people's expressions change as they saw the careful details, the handwritten notes about each space. "My company destroyed Ray Johnson for telling the truth. I can't bring him back to life, but I can make his dream a reality, not as a favor or charity, but as reparations for an injustice." "And what do you offer?" asked Mr. Carter, the man who was 3 months behind on his rent. "I'm not offering money." Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm offering something more valuable: permanence. The community center would be built with the best materials available, designed to last for generations. It would be owned by the community, managed by you, for the benefit of your children and grandchildren. But we have needs now," intervened Miss Peterson, the woman with the sick child. "My son needs an operation that costs $25,000. What good is a community center to me if my son dies?" The tears in the woman's eyes cut Ethan's heart like a knife. Robert smiled slightly, knowing he had won a crucial point. "Miss Peterson," Ethan approached her, "if you'll allow me, I will personally pay for your son's surgery, with no strings attached, without you having to sell your house, without you having to leave your community." The woman looked at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" "Because Ray Johnson taught me something, through his niece, that I hadn't learned in my 32 years of life, that there's a difference between building and destroying. And I want to build, ma'am. I want to build a future where families like yours don't have to choose between their home and their children's health." Robert cleared his throat, clearly irritated by the dramatic turn of the conversation. "That sounds very noble, Ethan. But let's be realistic. Can you guarantee you'll pay for every sick child's surgery, that you'll solve all these families' financial problems? Because we can guarantee $75,000 to each family this very week." "I can't solve all the problems," Ethan admitted, "but I can offer something that money can't buy. The chance for this community to grow without being displaced, for your traditions and family ties to remain intact, for your children to inherit something more than money." "Like what?" asked a young man with a skeptical expression. "Like belonging, like pride, like the certainty that this place will be here for your grandchildren, and they'll be able to say, 'I was born here, I grew up here, I built my life here with my people.'" It was then that something unexpected happened. From the entrance of the court, a female voice rose above the murmur. "Mr. Henderson, may I speak?" Everyone turned toward the voice, and Ethan felt the world come to a complete stop. There, standing at the entrance of the court with a backpack over her shoulder and her hair in a loose braid, was Sarah Johnson. She wore a simple light blue cotton dress that enhanced her green eyes, and though she looked thin, too thin, she had that natural dignity that made her stand out in any crowd. Her eyes met Ethan's for a moment, and he saw a mix of surprise, pain, and something else he couldn't identify. "Sarah!" Mama Rose jumped up. "Honey, it's so good to see you. Come here, sit with us." But Sarah didn't move from her spot at the entrance. "Mama Rose told me what's happening here. She told me about the 2 proposals and about my uncle's project." Her voice broke slightly when she mentioned Ray, but she quickly composed herself. "I came because I need to tell you something about my Uncle Ray, something you should know before you make your decision." Mr. Henderson nodded solemnly. "Speak, child. We all remember Mr. Ray with fondness." Sarah walked to the center of the court, and Ethan could see she was holding something, an old yellowed folder. "My uncle spent the last 5 years of his life unemployed, sick, and believing he had failed as a builder and as a man. But before he died, he gave me this." She held up the folder. "These are letters he never sent, addressed to this community." She opened the folder and took out several handwritten pages in the same careful script Ethan recognized from the plans. In these letters, my uncle explained why he lost his job, why he couldn't fulfill his promise to build the community center, and why he felt like he had failed you. But he also explained something more important, why you deserved better than empty promises from powerful men. She began to read in a clear voice, though tears streamed silently down her cheeks. "Dear neighbors of Dove Springs, I know you expected me to build the community center I designed for you, and it hurts me more than you can imagine not to have been able to keep that promise. But I want you to know it wasn't for a lack of trying or love for your community. It was because there are men who would rather build their fortunes on lies than build a better world on truth." The silence was absolute. Even Robert had stopped smiling. "Don't let anyone convince you that easy money is the solution to your problems. Money runs out, promises are broken, but a united community can overcome any adversity. If one day someone comes offering you gold in exchange for your home, ask them if they're willing to stay and build alongside you, or if they just want to buy your land and leave." Sarah looked up from the paper and stared directly at Robert. "My uncle wrote those words 2 years ago, when he was already very sick, as if he knew that one day you would have to choose between immediate cash and your permanent future." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Very moving, miss, but emotions don't pay the medical bills or solve real problems." "You're right," Sarah nodded. "Emotions don't solve problems, but honest men do." She turned to Ethan, and when she spoke, her voice had a strength he hadn't heard before. Ethan Williams, you told me you wanted to honor my uncle's memory. Are you willing to prove you're serious? Ethan stood up, feeling that this was the most important moment of his life. Tell me what you need me to do. First, are you willing to move here, to live in this community while the center is being built? Because my uncle always said you can't build for people you don't know. The question took Ethan completely by surprise. Live in Dove Springs, leave his mansion in Westlake Hills to live in a tin-roofed house without guaranteed running water. Robert let out a mocking laugh. Seriously? The millionaire Ethan Williams living like common folk? I'd like to see that. Ethan looked around the court at the expectant faces of the families who were waiting for his answer. He saw Mama Rose with her calloused hands from washing other people's clothes, Mr. Carter with the weary expression of a man working 2 jobs to support his family, Ms. Peterson with her sleeping baby in her arms. He saw a real community with real problems that needed real solutions from someone willing to walk beside them, not above them. Yes, he said, his voice ringing out clearly in the silence. I am willing to move here, to live as you live, to understand your problems from the inside, and to build the community center, not as a distant benefactor, but as your neighbor. A murmur of surprise ran through the crowd. Even Sarah seemed taken aback by the certainty of his answer. Second, she continued, are you willing to put it all in writing? Contracts that guarantee the ownership of the community center will always belong to the community, that it cannot be sold or mortgaged for any reason, and that you will have no right to recover your investment if you change your mind? Yes. Third, are you willing to hire workers from this community for the construction, pay them fair wages, and teach them skills they can use to get better paying jobs later? Yes. And fourth, Sarah took a deep breath before asking the final question. Are you willing to do all this without expecting anything in return? No public recognition, no tax benefits, no having your name on a gold plaque at the entrance. This time, Ethan took a moment to answer, not because he hesitated, but because he understood she was asking him something deeper. Was he willing to do something good, simply because it was the right thing to do without expecting a reward? Yes, he said finally. I'll do it because it's what your uncle would have wanted, and because it's what this community deserves. Sarah nodded slowly, and for the first time since she had arrived, a small smile touched her lips. Then you have my support, but on one condition. Which is? I supervise the construction for free, to make sure it's done exactly as my uncle designed it, with the materials he would have used, and with the love he would have put into every brick. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Does that mean? It means I'll be here every day making sure you keep your promise. Sarah turned to the crowd. And if you don't, if you turn out to be just another rich man who makes pretty promises and breaks them when he gets bored, I'll personally make sure the whole city knows what kind of person you really are. Robert stood up, clearly frustrated by the turn of events. This is ridiculous. You're betting your future on the promises of a man you don't even really know. My offer is real, it's immediate, and it guarantees you cash. Are you going to reject that for some romantic dream? It was Mr. Henderson who responded, standing with the dignity of his 70 years. Mr. Sullivan, with all due respect, you offer us money to leave. Young Ethan offers us the chance to stay and grow, and Mr. Ray's granddaughter offers to oversee that the promises are kept. To me, that doesn't sound like a romantic dream. It sounds like a real opportunity to build something permanent. And what if it doesn't work? What if in 6 months they get bored and leave you hanging? Then we will have failed trying to build something beautiful. Mama Rose stood up too, instead of having succeeded by selling our homes. And to me, that's an important difference. The vote was closer than Ethan had expected, but in the end, the community decided to reject Robert's offer and accept the community center project. It wasn't a unanimous decision. Several families voted to sell, understandably worried about their immediate needs, but it was a decision made with hope instead of desperation. As the crowd dispersed, with small groups still discussing the details of what had just happened, Ethan and Sarah finally found themselves alone in the center of the court. Thank you, he said simply. Don't thank me yet, she replied. The hard part is just beginning. Sarah, about what happened at the construction site, about your uncle. I know, she interrupted. I read about the changes you've made in your company, about firing the corrupt executives, about compensating the families affected by the defective materials. Mama Rose told me you're living differently. And does that change anything between us? Sarah looked at him with those green eyes that had haunted him for weeks. That depends on you, Mr. Williams. Whether you're really willing to be the man you promised to be tonight, or if this is just another performance to impress the woman who got away. It's not a performance, Ethan said, and there was so much sincerity in his voice that Sarah felt something stir in her chest. It's the person I should have been from the beginning, the person your uncle taught me to be, even though I never met him. My uncle always said that men are known by their works, not their words. Then let me show you my works. Sarah nodded slowly. All right, but Ethan, it was the first time she had called him by his first name, and he felt the two syllables were like music. If you disappoint me, if this turns out to be just an elaborate game to win me over, there won't be a second chance. I understand. Are you really willing to live here? It's not easy. There's no hot water. The power goes out often, and the neighbors will be watching your every move. Ethan smiled for the first time since she had arrived. Sarah, in the last few weeks I've learned to mix cement, to read plans from a worker's perspective, and to understand that money can't buy respect. I think I can learn to live without hot water. Okay. Sarah turned to leave but stopped and looked back at him. Ethan, there's something else I need to tell you. What? My uncle wrote something else in those letters. Something about you. Ethan felt his blood run cold. About me? Yes. He wrote that he had met your father when you were a boy, at the inauguration of a school they had built. He said you had asked if the children who would study there would be happy, and your father had laughed, saying the important thing was that they paid their tuition on time. Ethan vaguely remembered that inauguration. He had been 8 or 9, and it was his first visit to a finished construction site. My uncle wrote that in that moment, he knew you were different from your father, that you had the potential to be better, and he hoped that one day you would have the chance to prove it. The tears Ethan had been holding back for weeks finally overflowed. He believed that, after what we did to him? My uncle believed in the possibility of redemption for everyone. Sarah took a step closer. He used to say that the father's mistakes don't have to be the son's sins if the son chooses a different path. Ethan wiped his tears with the back of his hand, not caring that she saw him cry. Do you believe that too? Sarah studied him for a long moment, seeing beyond the surface, trying to read the soul of the man who had started to change her world from the moment they met. I'm willing to find out, she said finally, but together, as partners on this project, not as boss and employee. Partners? My uncle designed the community center. You're going to pay to build it, and I'm going to supervise to make sure it's done right. We're partners in honoring his memory. Ethan extended his hand. Partners then. Sarah shook his hand, and this time when they touched, the electric current they felt wasn't just physical attraction. It was mutual recognition, the spark that ignites when two people realize that together they can be more than they are apart. There's one more thing, Sarah said before letting go of his hand. What? If we're going to be partners, I need to know why you're really doing this. And don't tell me it's just to honor my uncle's memory, because we both know there's something more. Ethan took a deep breath. It was the moment for absolute truth. No excuses, no half-truths. Because in 2 days of knowing you, you taught me more about what it means to be a man of value than I had learned in 32 years. Because when I saw you build that wall, I saw someone who understood the difference between creating and destroying. And because, he hesitated, then continued with determination. Because I think I fell in love with you from the moment you refused to be impressed by my money. Sarah felt her breath catch. She hadn't expected such honesty, such vulnerability. Ethan, I know it's complicated. I know we have history, that my family hurt your family, that we come from completely different worlds. But I also know that what I feel for you is real in a way I've never experienced before. And what do you expect me to do with that information? Nothing. Ethan smiled sadly. I just wanted you to know that when I build this community center, when I live in this neighborhood, when I fulfill every promise I've made, I'll do it because it's the right thing to do. But I'll also do it in the hope of proving that I'm worthy of your respect, and maybe, if I'm very lucky, of something more. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan could see that she too was struggling with complicated feelings. Okay, she said finally. But if we're going to do this, we do it right. No favoritism, no special treatment, because you have romantic feelings. We are professional partners, working on an important project. Understood? Understood. And Ethan, she added as she walked away, if you really want to impress me, don't do it with money or grand gestures. Impress me by being consistent, day after day, decision after decision. Show me you can be the man you say you want to be. As he watched her walk away down the unpaved streets of Dove Springs, her back straight and her stride confident like someone who knows exactly who she is and what she's worth, Ethan knew he had just begun the most important challenge of his life. It wasn't just about building a community center. It was about building himself into the man who deserved the love of a woman like Sarah Johnson. And this time, there were no shortcuts, no tricks, no amount of money that could buy the outcome he wanted. Only honest work, day after day, brick by brick, until he proved that promises can be kept and that broken hearts can sometimes be repaired with actions more than with words. See Part 6. 3 months after Ethan Williams moved into a borrowed 2-room house in Dove Springs, the transformation was visible from every angle. Not just the transformation of the land where Ray Johnson's community center was rising, but the transformation of the man who had left behind his Italian suits for work jeans and t-shirts stained daily with sweat and cement. The first week had been a brutal culture shock. Ethan had gone from waking up to gourmet coffee prepared by a housekeeper to getting up at 5 in the morning to stand in line at the neighborhood's only clean water pump. He had traded showers with unlimited hot water for bathing, with pitchers of cold water in a shared bathroom. And he had swapped dinners at exclusive restaurants for meals cooked on a gas stove that went out whenever a strong wind blew. But a strange thing had happened during those first difficult weeks. He had begun to feel more like himself than he ever had before. The construction of the community center had begun exactly as Sarah had insisted, with a simple ceremony where Mama Rose blessed the land with holy water and words of gratitude for Ray Johnson's memory. There were no photographers, no grand speeches, no commemorative plaques, just families gathered around a dream that was finally becoming a reality. Sarah had kept her word to supervise every aspect of the construction. She arrived every day at 6 in the morning, an hour before the workers, to inspect the materials that had arrived the previous day. Ethan had learned to recognize her different expressions. The small smile when she found the cement was of the exact quality she had ordered, the frown when a worker had taken shortcuts the day before, and the look of intense concentration when she checked that every measurement perfectly matched her uncle's plans. Working alongside her every day had been a sweet torture for Ethan. He watched her direct the workers with a natural authority that had nothing to do with shouting or threats, but with deep knowledge and mutual respect. He saw her solve technical problems with a creativity that impressed even the most experienced masons, and he saw her honor her uncle's memory in every decision she made, as if Ray were there guiding her hands. But what tortured him most was the professional distance she maintained between them. "Good morning, Ethan. Did you review the plans for the electrical installation? We need to talk about the budget for the finishes." Cordial, efficient, completely professional, and completely impersonal. However, there were moments, small moments, that Ethan treasured like diamonds in a coal mine. Like the morning she arrived early and found him making coffee for all the workers, and she had smiled in a way that lit up her entire face. Or the afternoon a young worker cut his hand on a tool, and they both ran at the same time to help him, colliding in the process, and for a second they were so close that Ethan could count the golden freckles on her nose. Or the night it had rained so hard that the tin roof of his borrowed house began to leak, and Sarah had appeared at his door with a bucket and a worried expression, saying, "Mama Rose told me your roof is leaking. I thought you might need some help." They had spent 2 hours fixing the leaks together, working in a companionable silence that spoke of a comfort that went beyond mere professional collaboration. And when they had finally finished, both soaked from the rain seeping through, Sarah had said softly, "My uncle would have been proud to see how you work now. You no longer look like a rich guy playing at being a builder. You look like a builder who happens to have money." Those words had meant more to Ethan than any professional praise he had ever received. But the moment that truly changed everything came in the second month of construction. Ethan was working on the foundation of the main hall, mixing concrete with Mr. Carter and 2 of his sons, when he saw Sarah running towards him with a look of panic. "Ethan, we need to talk. Now." The urgency in her voice made him immediately drop what he was doing. "What's wrong?" "Robert Sullivan is back. And this time, he didn't come alone." Ethan looked over Sarah's shoulder and saw a convoy of black SUVs parked at the entrance to the neighborhood. Men in dark suits with intimidating expressions were getting out of the vehicles, led by Robert and an older man Ethan immediately recognized, Marcus Vance, the most ruthless lawyer in Austin. "What do they want?" "I don't know, but Mama Rose says they've been asking about property titles, construction permits, whether the community center has all the necessary licenses." Ethan felt his blood run cold. He had managed all the necessary permits, but he knew that in Texas there was always a way to find irregularities if someone had enough money and motivation to look for them. "Have they spoken to you?" "Not yet, but they're going house to house." "Ethan, I'm afraid they're looking for a way to stop the construction." "They won't be able to." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. "All the permits are in order, all payments are made, and the community voted democratically for the project." "What if they don't care if it's all legal? The question hung between them like a threat. They both knew there were ways to stop projects that had nothing to do with legality and everything to do with power and influence. Let's find out what they want. Ethan started towards the men in suits, but Sarah stopped him. Wait, if we go together, it will look like we're united against them. Let me talk to them first, as the project supervisor. You keep working, as if you don't care that they're here. Sarah, no, if Robert is here, it's because of me, not you. I'm not going to hide behind you. It's not hiding. Sarah placed a hand on his arm, the first voluntary physical contact she had initiated since the night of the community meeting. It's strategy. They expect you to react with fear or aggression. If you continue working normally, you show them you have nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Ethan looked into those green eyes that knew him better than he knew himself and nodded. Okay, but if you need help, if they say anything that makes you feel threatened, you yell for me. I will. Sarah walked towards where Robert and his companions were talking to Mr. Henderson, while Ethan went back to work but kept an ear out for the conversation. Good morning, gentlemen, he heard Sarah's voice, firm but polite. I'm Sarah Johnson, supervisor of the Community Center Construction. How can I help you? Ms. Johnson, Robert smiled, but it was a shark's smile. What a coincidence to find you here. We're from Pacific Urban Development, and we're conducting a routine inspection of constructions in the area. Routine inspection? With what authority? It was Marcus Vance who answered, pulling out a folder full of official documents. With the authority of the Austin Urban Development Department, miss. We've received complaints about irregular constructions in this area, and we are obligated to investigate. What kind of complaints? Construction without proper permits, improper use of land designated for residential housing, possible soil contamination, violations of anti-seismic building codes, Vance read from a list, and of course, the possible exploitation of unskilled labor. Ethan felt rage rise in his throat like lava. Every one of those accusations was false, but they were all technical enough to require extensive investigations that could halt construction for months. Mr. Vance, Sarah remained calm. All our permits are in order and can be verified at the corresponding department. The land was legally purchased, the plans were approved by certified engineers, and all our workers are duly registered and insured. We'll have to verify that, Robert intervened. In the meantime, I'm afraid we'll have to suspend construction until the investigation is complete. Suspend? Mr. Henderson approached with several neighbors. By what right? By the right the law gives us, sir. Vance showed another document. This is a temporary court order suspending all construction activity on this property until the reported irregularities are resolved. It was at that moment that Ethan could no longer contain himself. He dropped the shovel he was holding and walked towards the group, his hands and clothes covered in cement, but with a determination in his eyes that made several of the men in suits take a step back. Robert, his voice was dangerously calm. What do you really want? Ethan, my dear friend. Robert spread his arms as if to embrace an old friend. I'm just doing my civic duty by reporting possible violations of the law. Bullshit. Ethan stood directly in front of him. You have nothing to do with Austin's urban development. This is revenge because you couldn't accept me cleaning up the company. Be careful with the accusations you make, Ethan. They could be considered defamatory. Defamatory? Ethan let out a bitter laugh. You want to talk about defamation? Let's talk about what you and the others did to Ray Johnson. Let's talk about how you destroyed an honest man's life to protect your dirty profits. The atmosphere tensed immediately. The neighbors who had gathered around exchanged worried glances, sensing they were witnessing something bigger than a simple dispute over construction permits. Robert lost his diplomatic smile. Ray Johnson was a problematic employee who was fired for just cause. If you want to relive old labor disputes, do it in the appropriate courts. Problematic employee. Sarah stepped forward, and there was fire in her green eyes. My uncle was a man who refused to build with defective materials that could have killed families. Does that make him problematic? Your uncle was a naive idealist who didn't understand the realities of the construction business, Robert spoke with disdain. And apparently naivete is hereditary. It was as if he had slapped Sarah. Ethan saw her stagger slightly, as if the words had been a physical blow, and that's when something broke inside Ethan Williams. It wasn't rage he felt. It was something deeper, purer. It was the absolute certainty that the time had come to choose once and for all what kind of man he wanted to be. Mr. Vance, he addressed the lawyer without taking his eyes off Robert, does that court order have an expiration date? 30 days while the investigation is completed. And if during those 30 days it's proven that all the accusations are false, what happens? Construction could continue. but there would be fines for the lost time, legal costs, and possible penalties for— How much? Ethan interrupted. Give me a total figure. Vance consulted his documents. Approximately $50,000 in miscellaneous costs. Fine. Ethan took out his phone. Carmen, it's Ethan. I need you to transfer $50,000 to an account I'm about to give you. Yes, right now. No, I can't explain over the phone. Yes, I'm sure. Thanks. He hung up and looked directly at Vance. The money will be in the court's account in an hour. Now proceed with your investigation. But while you do, we continue to build. It doesn't work that way, young man. Vance looked confused. The order says construction must stop. The order says it must stop if there are no guarantees that legal costs will be covered in case of irregularities. I've just covered those costs. Now investigate all you want, but without interfering with our work. Robert looked furious. Ethan, you can't buy your way out of everything. I'm not buying my way out of anything. Ethan moved closer to him. I'm proving I have nothing to hide. Investigate whatever you want, Robert. Check every screw, every bag of cement, every permit. The only thing you're going to find is honest work done by honest people. And what if he finds minor irregularities, small mistakes that could justify additional fines? Ethan smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. Then I'll pay for those too, because I have something you never had, Robert. A clear conscience, and it turns out that having a clear conscience gives you a security that all your dirty money could never buy. There was a moment of tense silence, where the two men sized each other up. Finally, Robert turned to Vance. Proceed with the investigation. I want every document reviewed, every measurement verified, every worker interviewed. If there's anything at all irregular, I want it reported immediately. Of course, Mr. Sullivan. As the men in suits dispersed to begin their investigation, Robert approached Ethan one last time. This isn't over, Ethan. You might have enough money to cover the fines, but you don't have enough to protect all these people forever. And they know it. Ethan looked around, seeing the worried expressions of the families who had placed their trust in him and the project. He saw Mama Rose with her hands clasped around a rosary, Mr. Carter with his jaw tense, Ms. Peterson holding her recently operated on son with a look of fear. And then he saw Sarah standing by the half-built community center, her hair moving slightly in the wind and an expression of fierce determination in her eyes. You're right, Robert, Ethan said without taking his eyes off Sarah. I don't have enough money to protect these people forever, but I have something better. What? I have them, and they have me, and together we have something you'll never understand. We have a cause that's worth more than money. Robert followed his gaze to Sarah, and something akin to understanding crossed his face. Ah, I see. This is about the woman. This whole social benefactor act is to impress the granddaughter of the dead idealist. Ethan turned to him with an expression that made Robert take a step back. Careful, Robert. Be very careful what you're about to say about her. Or what? You're going to hit me. The millionaire turned Mason is going to defend his lady's honor. I'm not going to hit you. Ethan smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. I'm going to do something much worse. I'm going to prove that you are a small, irrelevant man, while I build something beautiful and permanent. And by the time I'm done, no one will remember your name, but the Ray Johnson Community Center will be here for generations. Robert opened his mouth to reply, but found no words. Finally, he stalked towards his SUV, followed by his entourage. This isn't over, Ethan, he shouted from the window. I will find a way to stop this. Try it, Ethan yelled back. But while you do, I'll keep building, brick by brick, day by day, until this place is everything Ray Johnson dreamed it would be. When the SUVs disappeared in a cloud of dust, Ethan found himself surrounded by the entire community. Men, women, children, the elderly, all looking at him with a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, genuine respect. Mr. Ethan, Mr. Henderson placed a hand on his shoulder. What you just did, a man doesn't do that for money. A man does that for love. Love for what, Mr. Henderson? The old man smiled wisely. Love for this community, love for the memory of Mr. Ray, and love for the woman who is teaching us all what it means to build with the heart. Ethan looked to where Sarah was standing, still by the community center, still with that look of fierce determination. But now there was something else in her eyes when she looked at him. There was recognition. Sarah, he walked over to her. Are you okay? I'm fine. But Ethan, what you just did, what? You just declared war on the most powerful man in the Texas construction industry. Do you realize that? Ethan shrugged. I didn't declare war on anyone. I just defended what's mine. Yours? This project, this community, your uncle's memory. Ethan paused, looking directly at her. And if you'll let me, you. The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to have its own weight. Sarah studied him with those eyes that seemed to see right into his soul. Ethan, do you really understand what you just said? I understand that for the past 3 months, working beside you, I've discovered who I really am. I understand that building this community center has become the most important thing I've ever done in my life, and I understand that when Robert insulted you, I felt a rage I had never experienced, because someone who doesn't deserve you dared to disrespect you. And what else do you understand? I understand that I love you. Ethan said the word simply, without drama, as one states an obvious fact. I love you for your strength, for your integrity, for the way you honor your uncle's memory every day. I love you for the way the workers respect you, for how the neighborhood kids run to you when you arrive, for the way you transform everything you touch into something better. Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. Ethan, I know it's complicated. I know we have history, that my last name still represents pain for you, that we come from worlds that don't always understand each other. But I also know that these 3 months have been the most real of my life, and it's all because of you. And what do you expect me to do with that information? Ethan smiled, remembering she had asked him the same question on the night of the community meeting. Nothing you don't want to do. I just wanted you to know that when I finish this community center, when I keep every promise I've made, when I prove I can be the man your uncle would have respected, I will have done it because I love you, and that's not going to change no matter what you decide. Sarah took another step closer, enough for Ethan to smell her shampoo mixed with the scent of cement and honest work. And what if I told you that I feel something too? Ethan's heart stopped completely. What do you feel? I feel that the man I met 3 months ago, the one who challenged me to build a wall in 2 days, no longer exists. In his place is someone who gets up before dawn to make coffee for the workers. Someone who learned to mix cement not because he had to, but because he wanted to do it right. Someone who lives in a house without hot water and does it with a smile because he understands that comfort is not the same as happiness. And what do you feel for that someone? Sarah took another step closer, so close that Ethan could see his own reflection in those green eyes that had captivated him from the first day. I feel that I could love him, she whispered. I feel that I already do. And then, finally, after 3 months of shared work, of respect earned brick by brick, of love built day by day with small gestures and great sacrifices, Ethan Williams and Sarah Johnson kissed. It wasn't a movie kiss, dramatic and perfect. It was a real kiss tasting of cement dust and sweat, with hands dirty from honest work, surrounded by the sound of construction and the voices of a community that had learned to believe in dreams again. It was the kiss that sealed not only their love, but their mutual commitment to build something together that was greater than either of them alone. When they finally broke apart, Mama Rose was applauding from her window. Mr. Henderson was smiling with satisfaction, and the workers had put down their tools to watch the scene with expressions of approval. "You know what?" yelled Mr. Carter. "I think Mr. Ray is smiling down from heaven. His community center isn't just being built. It also brought together the 2 people who deserve it most." The applause that followed was deafening, and Ethan realized he had gained something more valuable than Sarah's love. He had gained the family he never knew he had been looking for his whole life. 6 months later, the grand opening of the Ray Johnson Community Center took place on a sunny Saturday in October, when the Austin air had finally lost its summer humidity and had become crisp and clean like a fulfilled promise. The center was exactly as Ray had designed it, but better. The classrooms had large windows that filled the space with natural light. The community kitchen was equipped with industrial stoves donated by local restaurants. The auditorium had a sound system that would allow for performances and cultural events. And in the heart of the building, exactly where Ray had drawn it in his plans, there was a library with hundreds of books donated by schools and families from all over the city. But the most beautiful thing about the center was not its physical facilities. It was the life that was already pulsating within it. Literacy classes for adults in the mornings, vocational workshops for youths in the afternoons, neighborhood meetings on weekends, family celebrations on Sundays. Ray's dream of creating a space where the community could grow together had come true in ways he never could have imagined. Ethan no longer lived in the borrowed tin-roofed house. He had bought a lot on the same street and had built a simple but solid house with 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen for hosting neighbors, and a workshop where he had installed all the construction tools that had belonged to Ray. Sarah had supervised every detail of that construction too, ensuring it was a home worthy of the man who had learned to build with honor. Williams' construction had changed too. Carmen Rodriguez had been promoted to vice president, Alex Torres was leading a new sustainable construction department, and they had implemented a scholarship program for the children of construction workers who wanted to study engineering or architecture. The company was no longer the richest in Texas, but it was the most respected. Robert Sullivan had found minor irregularities during his investigation, things as small as permits that had taken an extra day to process, and had managed to impose fines totaling about $10,000. Ethan had paid without a fuss, and then had donated another $10,000 to a low-income housing program in honor of Mr. Sullivan's diligent investigation. The gesture had made Robert the laughingstock of the Austin construction industry. His revenge had resulted in more money for social causes and more recognition for Ethan as an ethical businessman. But none of that mattered as much as what had happened the week before. Ethan had been working in the workshop, restoring an old sewing machine that Mama Rose wanted to donate to the community center for sewing classes, when Sarah had arrived with an expression he had never seen before. Nervous, excited, scared, all at the same time. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." "What's wrong?" He had immediately put down his tools, recognizing it was something important. "I found something among my uncle's things, something I hadn't seen before." She had shown him a small wooden box that had been stored in the back of a closet. Inside were photographs, letters, and a sealed envelope with Ethan's name written in Ray's careful script. "A letter for me, but we never really met. Open it." With trembling hands, Ethan had opened the envelope and begun to read. "Ethan Williams, Jr. If you are reading this, it means my niece found this letter after my death, and that somehow our paths crossed despite everything that happened between your family and mine. I want you to know that I never blamed you for your father's mistakes. I had seen in your eyes when you were a child that you had a different heart. There was hope in you, a chance to be better. If you're reading this, it probably means that hope came true. It probably means you found a way to build instead of destroy, to unite instead of divide. I asked Sarah not to give you this letter unless she was sure you had become the man I believed you could be. If you are holding it, it's because she trusts you, and if my niece trusts you, it's because you've earned it. Take care of her, Ethan. She is the best part of what is left of me in this world. And if you manage to love her as she deserves, you will have built something more beautiful than any building you can imagine. With respect and hope, Ray Johnson, P.S. In the bottom of this box is something that belonged to my sister Luz, Sarah's mother. I think it has been waiting for the right man to find its new home." Ethan had looked in the bottom of the box and found a simple white gold ring with a small but perfect emerald, the same green as Sarah's eyes. And there in the workshop, filled with tools and surrounded by the sound of community life flowing from the center they had built together, Ethan Williams had knelt before Sarah Johnson. "Sarah, from the day I met you, you have been teaching me what it means to build something worthwhile. You taught me that honest work is more valuable than easy money. You taught me that respect is earned with actions, not words. You taught me that true love is built day by day, decision by decision, moment by moment." He had taken out the ring, and Sarah had brought her hands to her heart. "You taught me that there is no difference between building a building and building a life, as long as you do it with clean hands and a pure heart. Would you do me the honor of letting me build the rest of my life with you?" Sarah had cried, she had laughed, she had said yes 1,000,000 times as her mother's ring found its perfect place on her finger. And now, a week later, as he watched the community of Dove Springs celebrate the opening of Ray Johnson's dream, Ethan knew he had found something more valuable than all the money in the world. He had found his home, he had found his purpose, he had found the love of his life. And he had learned that sometimes the best constructions are not made with bricks and cement, but with time, patience, and the daily decision to be better than you were yesterday. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah came up behind him, wrapping her arms around him. "I'm thinking your uncle was right." Ethan leaned back against her. "The difference between building and destroying isn't in the materials you use, but in the love you put into the work. And how much love did you put into this?" Sarah gestured towards the community center, where children were playing in the yard, seniors were playing dominoes at the tables, and entire families were sharing food and laughter. "All I had," Ethan turned in her arms to look at her, "and all I've been learning to have thanks to you." They kissed again, with the sweet taste of fulfilled promises and dreams come true. And around them, life flourished in all the ways Ray Johnson had imagined when he drew his plans with careful hands and a hopeful heart. Because that's how the best love stories work, not with perfect endings, but with perfect beginnings. Not with the promise that there will never be problems, but with the certainty that any problem can be overcome when two people decide to build together, brick by brick, day by day, forever. And in the years that followed, when the children of Dove Springs would ask about the history of the community center where they learned and played, Mama Rose would tell them about a good man named Ray who dreamed of a better place for his community. She would tell them about a strong woman named Sarah who made sure that dream came true. And she would tell them about a rich man named Ethan who learned that true wealth is not measured in money, but in the number of lives you touch in a positive way. But most of all, she would tell them that true love is not like in the movies. It's better, because it's built day by day with honest work and clean hearts until it becomes something so solid and beautiful that it can last forever. And so ends our love story, built brick by brick, day by day, until it became something beautiful and permanent. What did you think of the ending? Do you believe in love that is built with hard work and patience? Tell us in the comments what you liked most about Ethan and Sarah's story. Give it a like if it touched your heart, and share with us what city you're reading from. If you have ideas for new love stories you'd like us to tell, we want to hear them too. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate the transformative power of true love. Thank you for joining us on this journey of construction, love, and second chances.